Thank you, Maggie. Good evening. I am Christine Kirby. I am the Assistant Commissioner of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection for the Bureau of Air and Waste. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all to MassDEP's 5th stakeholder meeting. And we're continuing to gather your input into developing new provisions for including cumulative impact analyses, sometimes known as CIA, into certain categories of air quality permits that the department issues. To date, we've had 4 sets of stakeholder meetings on this topic, and tonight's meeting is, and yesterday's meeting continues the important process for the Commonwealth to move along in implementing cumulative impact analysis again for air permits. And as you can imagine, MassDEP, and you see by our stakeholder meetings, we're committed to a robust process to ensure that all stakeholders, including yourselves, with an interest in the regulations we will propose later this year, in 2022, are engaged. Next slide, please. So tonight we'll be presenting information on the cumulative impact analysis process. We will also be reporting back on the evaluation of the indicators we discussed at our meetings in November last year in 2021, including indicators in the environmental category, public health, and also socioeconomic indicators that may be ultimately used in the cumulative impact analysis. The evaluation of these indicators included your input that you gave to us in the November stakeholder meetings. In tonight's meeting, I just want to note that the speakers are going to pause periodically throughout the presentation to see if there are any questions, or if you wish to discuss part of the presentation, if you have additional input or questions. And as Maggie just mentioned, if at any time during the presentation, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to use the raise hand function or indicate that you have a question in the chat, and ERG will bring it to our attention. Next slide. This slide shows where we are in the process. So we started holding monthly stakeholder meetings last August in 2021. And our plan is to propose regulations by October. And tonight we'll begin discussions of the CIA process and plan to have discussions of the various elements of the CIA framework in March and in April of this year. Want to note we will not be holding a meeting in February. We have quite a bit of work to do, and we're finding that taking a little time helps us in preparing for the stakeholder meeting. So again, we won't be holding a meeting in February. We hope to have an outline of the regulations for input this coming summer, well in advance of proposed regulations, again, that we are planning to propose in October. Next slide, please. So why are we here? You see this slide, it shows Governor Baker signing the new climate law, which was signed on March 26th, 2021, and it became effective on June 26th, 2021. Next slide, please. On the climate law, specific to cumulative impact analysis, it directs MassDEP to evaluate and seek public comment on incorporating cumulative impact analyses into certain permits and propose regulations within 18 months requiring cumulative impact analyses in certain air permits. As you may know, the climate law directs MassDEP to incorporate cumulative impact analyses into certain air permits by the end of this year through a robust public engagement and comment process. I just want to note the climate law also had separate requirements for MEPA as shown in this slide, and we're not going to get into that tonight. So to wrap up, again, we appreciate your partnership in exploring this complex topic. We have reached out to a wide array of stakeholders, including environmental, municipalities, the regulated community, environmental and business organizations, and especially environmental justice populations and communities and organizations to participate in this process. And again, we're very glad to see you here tonight. Thank you for your participation. And now I'm going to turn it over to Glenn Keith, our Director of Air and Climate of the Air and Climate Division. He's going to give an overview of the CIA process. Glenn?
Thanks, Christine. So what I'm going to do is give a a fairly high level overview of the CIA process as we envision it and go through those steps. Next slide, please. So this graphic shows what the cumulative impact analysis steps could be. And I'm just going to touch on each one of these. So the first one is that we've been thinking about having a requirement for a pre-application community notice and engagement process. So this would be prior to even applying for the air permit. The applicant would be required to notify MassDEP as well as the affected community about the proposed air permit, and then to engage with the community to find out what their concerns are. And this could be similar to what the process that the MEPA office has put in place in their public involvement protocol for environmental justice communities that was published in December and took effect on January 1st as part of the MEPA process, where they require prior to filing an ENF or EIR that is affecting an EJ community, the project proponent would have to notify the community 45 days in advance. And the idea there is the MEPA office and the environmental EEA environmental justice director would provide lists of community-based organizations to applicants so they know who to notify. Another way to do that would be through notifying public officials. So that's the first step. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But then the next step would be for the applicant to assess baseline community conditions. And this would be gathering data on environmental, health, and socioeconomic indicators, which we discussed at our last meeting in November, and that APT is going to report back on later in this meeting today. Once the baseline community conditions are gathered and assessed, then there'd be the analysis of cumulative impacts of existing and added air pollution, as well as consideration of the community in the context of these community conditions. So that would be really the heart of the analysis. And once that analysis is done, the remaining steps would be similar to the process that we have in place today, where the applicant would file a permit application that would include the cumulative impact analysis report. And at that point, provide notice to the public that the report and the application is with DEP, so that the public could look at it concurrently with DEP and submit comments to DEP. DEP would review the permit application and the cumulative impact analysis, and then issue a proposed permit decision that would go out for public comment period, formal public comment, and then MassDEP would issue the determination. So this again is just very high level, some of the steps that we envision could be as part of this process. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we are thinking about a pre-application community notice and engagement requirement. So prior to even applying, the applicant would notify MassDEP and the affected community about the proposed project. And this would allow community concerns to be gathered by the applicant and voiced, so that as before the applicant conducts the community condition baseline, they'd hear from the community what the specific concerns might be. We'd also either encourage or require the applicant to meet with MassDEP about the proposed project and how to conduct the cumulative impact analysis, as well as what kind of community engagement plans they may be thinking about. Even today, in our current air permit program, we do encourage all applicants to have a pre-application meeting with DEP to discuss the project, so that we can communicate any expectations, answer questions, so that we can get a good application in that's sufficient. So that would be part of the process. And then the applicant would conduct community engagement that seek input from the affected community to identify community concerns about the proposed project. So we really are we've heard clearly through these stakeholder meetings that there needs to be community engagement, public participation in the cumulative impact analysis. So we're putting this up front so that this work can be done as the applicant prepares the cumulative impact analysis. Next slide, please. So the next step would be assessing the baseline community conditions, and this is where applicants would collect data on the environmental, health, and socioeconomic indicators to characterize the affected community and create a baseline of current conditions. And again, APT is going to report back on those indicators later in the presentation. But this would give, provide a context and make known to the applicant as well as to DEP as well as to the community what the condition of the community is, what challenges they may face, any burdens, and it establishes a baseline or starting point for the assessment of project impacts. These indicators include things such as existing levels of pollution, health vulnerabilities, and other stressors. And because the applicant would have already engaged in some community engagement, they would get that input to inform the baseline assessment. Next slide, please. At that point, the applicant would then analyze the cumulative impacts of both existing and added air pollution, focusing on the air quality indicators that are closely related to air pollution impacts, since the primary impact of the facility would be air emissions. So this would include existing air quality, as well as air quality related health risks in the affected community, presence of other sources of air pollution, population sensitive to air pollution, and any health vulnerabilities of the affected community. So this would be the heart of the analysis. The non-air quality indicators that are assessed in the community baseline would also be considered. And we're still working on what exactly would be in this step of the process. Next slide, please. And then the process would continue that after conducting the cumulative impact analysis, the applicant would file the air permit application, including the CIA, with MassDEP. The applicant or MassDEP would notify the affected community of the availability of the application and begin its review. Even today, when a permit application is submitted to DEP, it is available for review by the public through our online public data portal. But in this step, we would make sure that the affected community is notified of that so that the community can review the cumulative impact analysis and submit comments to MassDEP while MassDEP is also reviewing the application. This would be an informal comment period, and later there'd be a formal comment period. So after its review, MassDEP would then issue a proposed permit decision for formal public comment. Currently, our air regulations require a 30-day comment period where one is required. So one area we'd like feedback on is, the length of that. Is that going to be enough time where there's now a cumulative impact analysis involved as well? And then after the public comment period, MassDEP would issue a final permit decision, either approving the project or approving with conditions, or potentially even denying the air permit application. So that's again, a high-level overview of the process or steps we envision. And I think we're going to just pause here and see if anyone has any questions or comments. And again, you can write questions in the chat, or you can hit raise your hand and we can unmute you so you can ask a question or make a comment.
Thanks, Glenn. I don't see any questions yet, but we do have a raised hand from Stephen Cherone. So Stephen, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the help. I was having a hard time finding the raised hand thing, and found the Control Y is the secret. But I was wondering, just stepping back to Christine's opening comments, could you just give a little more color about the next several months prior to the kind of conceptual regs coming out, specifically around discussions of getting more in the details what a CIA really, as an applicant, what the CIA portion of the process will consist of.
Right. So that's really what we're working on right now. So, and again, we're not going to have a meeting in February to give us more time to flush that out, so that we would be hopefully coming back to this meeting with more details on that at the March meeting. And if we need more stakeholder meetings or even, technical subgroups, we can certainly form those as well, because we know there's a lot of, work yet to be done. But that's what we're planning. I can't really be more specific than that at this point.
Sure. I was asking, I think at this point, more about the process. So
Yeah.
you'll come back in March with, after you've had more time, once you've developed your framework conceptually of how you think it's going to work, and then that will be like presented in one of these similar meetings. And then you'll evaluate at that point if there's, from the regulated community and the consultants and the EJ communities, if there's a need for subgroups or a technical subgroup or something to just walk through how it's going to work in terms of people that have air permits, giving you feedback on, what will be difficult and what will not be in terms of conceptually what you'd like to see.
Yeah, no, that's exactly what we're thinking, because we realize this again, there may be a certain level of complexity, and we want to get feedback from, as you mentioned, consultants, as what environmental justice groups, but also consultants who practice in this area and who have to prepare these permit applications.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks for your question, Stephen. I don't see any other raised hands at this time, and there's no questions in the chat.
Okay, then I think I'm gonna hand it over to Lisa McDonald from APT.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Okay. Good evening. My name is Lisa McDonald, and I'm the project director for the APT Associates team supporting MassDEP on the cumulative impact assessment. I will be presenting an update on the indicators we have been evaluating for use within the CIA. Next slide, please. If you attended the November stakeholder meeting, you saw that we presented an initial set of indicators that we asked you all for input on additional indicators that we should consider. To date, we've evaluated over 80 indicators for inclusion within the CIA. Next slide, please. We've organized the indicators into 3 general categories: environmental, health, and demographic and social economic indicators. In addition, since the November meeting, we've added a 4th category, which we've called climate. And it's partially based on what we heard from all of you at the last meeting. Next slide, please. Also, if you remember from the November stakeholder meeting, we discussed that we would be evaluating each of the indicators according to 5 criteria. This includes data availability, appropriate geographic scale, appropriate time frame, redundancy, and whether or not the indicators are quantitative or qualitative. Next slide, please. As I've already mentioned, we started with a list of over 80 indicators and screened those indicators using the evaluation criteria. At the end of that process, we still have 44 indicators that we're still evaluating, and we've now grouped those indicators into 2 groups. The first group is what we are calling baseline community conditions indicators. These are indicators that directly describe air quality conditions or other environmental health, demographic, and social economic characteristics that describe the community surrounding an air permit facility and are prevalent in other EJ tools and evaluations. The second group we are calling supplemental indicators. These are additional indicators that can be used to further describe baseline community conditions. For example, If through community engagement, it is learned of a particular environmental concern that is represented by a certain indicator that is important, we can include that in the baseline assessment. There may also be other indicators that describe specific sites or locations, or perhaps are brought up within a community engagement event that can help to describe baseline conditions. This list is not meant to be exclusive, and so other indicators may be added in addition to this supplemental list. I also want to point out that the indicators that are presented here today are not final, and you still have time to provide us with your comments or questions as we continue to evaluate these indicators for inclusion within the CIA. I now will discuss some of the specific indicators that we'll include in the baseline and supplemental lists. Next slide, please. Again, we have 4 categories of indicators that we have been evaluating and can be used to describe baseline conditions in the community surrounding an air permit facility. Those include demographic and social economic indicators, which include social, economic, and statistical data describing the population living in a specific geography. Health indicators assess the existing health in a specific geography. Environmental indicators assess existing sources and amounts of pollution and areas of environmental degradation and contamination. And climate indicators assess the potential for climate-related stressors or mitigators in a particular area. Next slide, please. The social, economic, and demographic indicators include the indicators identified in the State of Massachusetts Environmental Justice Policy that was updated in 2021. The EJ populations are defined as neighborhoods, which include US Census block groups, that meet one or more of the following criteria: low income, minority, and English language isolation. In addition, we have added a category of indicators called sensitive receptive sites, which are institutions and facilities that are temporary or permanently house people that could be sensitive to air pollution and other environmental burdens. These include daycares, schools, long-term care facilities, and subsidized and public housing. These are proximity-based indicators that can provide information on sensitive and vulnerable populations to air pollution. In addition, unemployment and education are social economic indicators that are widely used to assess vulnerable and disadvantaged population in other EJ tools. Finally, we have included the Social Vulnerability Index. Sorry about this. Finally, we have included the Social Vulnerability Index, which was developed by the Center of Disease Control and the Agency for Toxic Substance and Disease Registry. It includes 15 variables from the US Census to assess a community's vulnerability and resiliency to natural and human-made disasters. The 15 indicators in the SVI are grouped into 4 themes: social economic status, household composition, race, ethnicity, language, and housing. Each of the 4 themes has its own ranking that indicates vulnerability, as well as overall vulnerability ranking for each census tract in the US. I will pause just for a minute and see if anyone has any questions about these indicators.
Thanks, Lisa. Looks like we don't have any questions so far.
Okay, I'll move on then. Next slide. We have also identified and screened environmental indicators that can help assess existing sources and amounts of pollution. The air quality indicators can provide a picture of current levels of air pollution and potential emission sources in a community. This information is important when trying to assess the baseline environmental conditions. Additional mobile sources of air pollution, such as proximity to bus train stations and distribution centers, were added to the list of indicators after receiving stakeholder input during the November meetings. Water quality was also added as an indicator after receiving stakeholder input. Issues with water quality can identify areas of environmental degradation and contamination, and water quality issues can make communities more susceptible to impacts of air pollution. Next slide, please. There are potential health effects that come from living near emitting facilities or areas of environmental degradation. For example, particulate matter can be released into the air from a power plant during electricity generation. Additionally, the presence of solid waste sites can produce odors and pollutant exposures that affect the health and quality of life of nearby residents. The proximity of these areas' facilities should be considered when assessing baseline community conditions. Data on most of these indicators is available from the DPH EJ tool. I'll pause for just a minute to see if anyone has any questions on the environmental indicators.
No questions so far.
Okay. Next slide, please. We've identified several health indicators for the baseline community assessment. The first 4 you see on the slide are part of Massachusetts 2021 EJ policy, and they are indicators of health vulnerabilities in a community. The other 4 health indicators were also chosen because they provide more information about the baseline community health conditions. Health indicators such as asthma, COPD, and COVID-19 can be directly affected by an increase in air pollution and serve as indicators of sensitivities in potentially affected communities. Other indicators like heart attack and premature mortality rates provide measures of overall community health conditions. The vulnerable health indicators are available from the DPH EJ tool, and others are also available in the Massachusetts mapping tools. CDC also provides data on some of these indicators. I'd like to note that this COVID-19 and the premature mortality rates were 2 of the indicators that were added after the last stakeholder meeting. I'll pause just a minute to see if anybody has questions on the health indicators.
Nothing yet, Lisa.
Okay. Next slide, please. Climate indicators can be used to describe the baseline community conditions and include heat islands and green space and parks. Heat islands were suggested at the last stakeholder meeting, and we felt that it was important to include that indicator. Identifying if a facility is in an area that is at risk for exposure of extreme heat can provide an indication of the heat-related impacts that are often exacerbated by air pollution. In addition, heat islands are often negatively correlated with tree canopy. Green space, open space, and parks can mitigate heat impacts, air pollution, and noise pollution, and provide recreational physical activity opportunities. I'll pause there for a minute and see if anyone has questions on our climate indicators.
Yeah, we have a raised hand from Cindy Loopy. Go ahead and question, Cindy.
Hi, thank you. So you might be covering this later, but I guess in terms of the baseline community conditions, we often think about potential for flooding as part of this, and I don't know if that's assessed more as a future community condition or you know, whether it's covered in some other way, but sometimes potential to flood around particularly polluting facilities is a significant factor.
Yes, thanks for that comment. I'm going to get into the supplemental indicators here on these next slides, and flooding is
great.
one of those
Okay,
supplemental indicators. So if you give me another minute, we'll get to it. But thank you for that comment, Cindy. I do think it's important. Other questions?
No, I don't see anything else.
Okay, next slide, please. The next 2 slides provide additional or supplemental indicators that could be used to describe baseline community conditions. Again, these indicators could be included if the community engagement or other information warrant their evaluation. Next slide, please. We have several supplemental demographic and socioeconomic indicators that could be included in a baseline assessment. These include age, both the prevalence of younger and older populations in an affected community, as well as the prevalence of immigrant and foreign-born and disabled populations. Crime rates, including violent crime rates, could also be included. Access to healthcare, including proximity to healthcare facilities and health insurance, has been shown to be associated with health outcomes. Access to quality foods or the prevalence of food insecurity is considered a social factor of health in the Massachusetts Health Equity Task Force report, or health equity, and can be associated with poor or fair health. Housing fuel use can impact indoor air quality, providing an indication of the prevalence of populations that are already exposed to indoor air pollutants. Fuels associated with indoor air pollution include wood and coal. Food insecurity and violent crime and drug addiction were suggested at the November stakeholder meeting as possible indicators to include. Note that there were several other social, economic, and demographic indicators suggested at the last stakeholder meeting that are not included on this list as of right now. They were evaluated with the criteria and were shown to be either redundant, covered by other indicators, or the data was difficult to obtain for these indicators, and thus has been left off for now, but this could change in the future. So I just wanted to note that. Okay, next slide. This slide presents the supplemental indicators for environmental health and climate. For environmental, the neurological hazard index is included, which can address stakeholder concerns about neurological risks. For health, mental health was also suggested at the last stakeholder meeting. Mental health can be included as a baseline indicator as it provides an important measurement of existing levels of psychosocial stress in the community that may be affected by the siting of additional facilities. For climate-related stressors such as flooding threats and land covers can also be included as baseline indicators. Both were suggested at the November stakeholder meeting. And flooding threats can provide important information about vulnerable communities located in the floodplain at risk for sea level rise and from urban and riverine floods. Massachusetts has a climate tool known as Climate Resiliency Design, which includes some of this information. Okay, next slide. I think that's my last slide. So I will stop there and see if folks have questions on any of the indicators.
Thanks, Lisa. I don't see any questions just yet.
Okay, I'm going to turn the presentation over now to Michelle Krasnick, my colleague from Apt Associates, and she's going to walk us through a comparison of indicators.
Thanks, Lisa. Good evening. My name is Michelle Krasnick from Apt Associates, and I'm a senior associate on the Apt Associates team that's working on the indicators. I will be presenting a comparison of indicators included in EPA's EJ screen and in Cal EPA's CalEnviro screen, and the current list of indicators being considered for the MassDEP air permitting process that Lisa just presented. Both EJ screen and CalEnviro screen were presented in a previous stakeholder meeting, but I will describe them here briefly. EJ screen is an EPA tool that combines environmental and demographic indicators. It can be used to identify geographic areas meriting further review, outreach, or analysis. And CalEnviro screen is a Cal EPA tool that includes 21 indicators to assess pollution burden and population characteristics. Indicators that are included in these two tools were selected using similar criteria to what was used to evaluate the potential indicators for the MassDEP air permitting process. On the next few slides, we will compare the indicators in EJ screen, CalEnviro screen, and the current list of indicators being considered for the MassDEP air permitting process. Next slide, please. So the next few slides will look very similar, so I'm just going to walk you through this first one. First, we have listed here different indicators based off indicator category, and then we present whether or not they're included in CalEnviroScreen, EJScreen, or the MassDEP air permitting process. I do want to note that indicators that are included in the for consideration for the MassDEP air permitting process as supplemental indicators have an asterisk here. And in for any indicators that are not currently in the EJScreen tool, but are proposed to be in the next iteration of the EJScreen tool, we'll have a double asterisk here as well. So this slide shows the socioeconomic and demographic indicators included in CalEnviroScreen, EJScreen, and the current list of indicators being considered for the MassDEP air permitting process. As you can see here, most of MassDEP's demographic and socioeconomic indicators are also included in EJScreen and CalEnviroScreen. In addition, MassDEP indicators that are currently included on the list are disabled populations, social vulnerability index, and crime rates. And these are not included in the other tools. Next slide, please. This next slide shows sensitive receptor and access to resource indicators. For the sensitive receptors, most of this information is also included in EJScreen, but not in CalEnviroScreen. We have also considered to include daycares and preschool facilities as indicators for sensitive populations. Food insecurity and healthcare indicators are proposed to be included in the next iteration of EJScreen and are also included in the current list of indicators being considered for the MassDEP air permitting process. CalEnviroScreen does not include these sensitive receptors and access to healthcare, food, or open space indicators. Next slide, please. This slide shows the environmental indicators included in CalEnviroScreen, EJScreen, and the current list of indicators being considered for the MassDEP air permitting process. As you can see, the MassDEP indicators align well with the indicators from CalEnviroScreen and EJScreen. In addition to the current list of indicators being considered for the MassDEP air permitting process, also includes additional air pollution focus indicators, such as additional criteria pollutants and proximity to mobile sources of air pollution. Next slide, please. The indicators on this slide are focused on identifying proximity to emitting facilities or areas of environmental degradation. Again, the current list of indicators being proposed for the MassDEP air permitting process aligns well with both CalEnviroScreen and EJScreen, and also includes additional indicators that represent potential areas of degradation, such as large fuel depots, wastewater treatment plants, and energy generation and supply locations, such as power plants. Next slide, please. This slide shows a comparison of health indicators. And again, the indicators on the current list of the indicators that we are currently considering for the MassDEP air permitting process align well with CalEnviroScreen and EJScreen. And the MassDEP list has also included additional indicators such as COPD, lung cancer rates, and COVID-19 and mental health as well. Next slide, please. Climate-related indicators included in the current list of indicators being considered for the MassDEP air permitting process are heat islands, land cover, and flooding threats. Open space and parks have also been considered in this category as well. EJScreen includes a number of these flooding indicators, as well as indicators that are proposed to be in the next iteration of EJScreen, which are wildlife hazard potential and drought. Heat islands and land cover are not included in EJScreen or CalEnviroScreen. And with that, we just wanted to, again, present you a comparison of indicators between these two tools and the indicators that are being considered for the MassDEP air permitting process. And with that, I'm open for any questions.
Thanks, Michelle. We do have a raised hand from Cindy. Cindy, go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you. I hope I'm not hogging the mic, but one question that we have, given the added information about particular health impacts from ultrafine particles, wondering if PM 2.5 analysis is a surrogate for smaller particles as well, or whether it just stops at the PM 2.5 level.
Yeah, I think, if you have questions on specific indicators that were mentioned at the stakeholder meeting that weren't included, I think you can direct those to MassDEP and we can give you a more detailed answer as to why that didn't get included. But, just off the top of my head, yeah, there isn't a great data set for ultrafines that we could identify at this moment. But I think if you want more information, we can certainly get back to you on that.
Nope, great, thank you.
Great, thanks, Cindy. And Stephen, I see you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, as part of this kind of evaluation of indicators, have you looked yet on readily availability of the data for somebody going through the screen? And then are you seeing it as something that a potential applicant would go to a DEP website and all the indicators that you've indicated will be available through some kind of screening tool? I guess that's the point to end the question.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and let Glenn maybe take that one. If he's.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, right. Yeah, we understand that, the use of these indicators would need to be readily available. And so as we go through this, that's one of the criterion for these. And I think we will be working on trying to provide some kind of mechanism to make these available, or at least if they're in more than one data location, at least clear directions on how they can easily be obtained. Does that answer your question?
Yep. Yeah, just curious where you were in comparing availability versus, the number of factors. It seems like on the list, the list is pretty long relative to,
Right. And again, this isn't a final list, but these are, indicators that have, we've identified and that stakeholders have suggested that we're considering. But, the availability of the data and ease of access is certainly something that has to be considered.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you for your question, Stephen. Next, we'll move on to Kevin Shen.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for this. I had a quick question. Let me know if this is off the mark, but is there anything specified about like the geographic scale of the indicator or how granular it is? If it's on the neighborhood level or county or something like that? I was just wondering if there's anything on that.
Well, I think, Michelle, you may want to weigh in. I think each indicator has different scales. So certain data is only available at, census block versus census tract. And then, point sources are just point sources on a map. Is that accurate, Michelle?
Yeah, that's accurate. And we're also, as we're evaluating these indicators, some indicators, got screened out because that was part of one of our criterion, and other indicators that are important that might be at a not quite as granular scale as we'd like. We may still include them if they're very important, but we have to make some decisions on how they'll be included in terms of, the baseline assessment. So that's certainly something we're considering and part of our criterion that we're evaluating.
Thanks.
Great, thanks, Kevin. I don't see any other raised hands or questions in the chat. So I think we're okay right now.
Great. So with that, I'm going to shift over to Joanne Warren from MassDEP.
Thank you. So I'm the Deputy Director of the Air and Climate Division, and I just wanted to do a few wrap-up slides here. We wanted to let you know that the next meeting will be March 22nd and 23rd. And as been discussed by Glenn and Christine, our topics will cover various parts of the framework, such as, which permits will require the CIA, how to assess the indicators, how to analyze project impacts and permit decisions. I'm not sure whether all those would be covered in March, but those are the areas we're working on, and hope to have as much of the framework that we can present them as possible. As we've done before, we will have a survey available on the website so that if you, didn't have input or questions during the stakeholder meeting, but you think about it afterwards, or you want to contemplate some questions, you can do it through this survey mechanism that will be on the website. And this is the link to it here. Will be on a slide in a minute, and you can provide us input after the stakeholder meeting. And we encourage you to do that. And also say it will post it on the website, and that's the link for that as well. Here's all the different links for your ease, both for our process and the MIPA process, where you can put comments under our process on the left-hand side, as well as getting on our distribution list. Although if you come to a meeting, we automatically put you on a distribution list. So you'll be on that, but if you know of someone else who'd like to be on the distribution list to be notified of our meetings, our website, of course, and then the survey I just referred to. MIPA has put their regulations in by the end of the year, and they're starting a phase 2 of their process. And that first link is about their phase 2 of their process on their regulation changes. They also have a distribution list and their website on their process for the climate law changes that was required for their regulations. After the meeting, we've done this the last couple of stakeholder meetings. When you exit the Zoom call, there'll be an automatic evaluation with just some 4 simple questions for how you like the meeting. Are there any criticisms or improvements that we could do? If you take the time to fill that out, we appreciate it, just to give us some feedback so we can continue to improve, or just know how the process is going. So that's everything I had. We really thank you for attending. We really appreciate your participation and continued interest, and look forward to having your continued engagement in this important process for us. So we hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you very much.